Good evening. Thank you all for joining us here tonight for the Aspen Institute Leadership Series and the presentation of the 10th Annual Preston Robert Tisch Award in Civic Leadership. I'm Dan Porterfield, the President and CEO of the Aspen Institute, and I'm honored to be here with you this evening and with the Tisch family and with our honoree, the extraordinary Cecile Richards. Thank you all for being here. Although the lights are bright, I think we have a few of our trustees in the room, in addition to Laurie Tisch. I think Alice Young is here, and Laura Lauder may be here, and Ann McNulty may be here. I know Rod Von Lipsey is here, but we have the best board in nonprofit America, and thank you all for supporting us. The Preston Robert Tisch Award in Civic Leadership represents the best of our country, both in who it remembers and who it recognizes. The award is made possible by the family of the late Preston Robert Tisch to carry on his legacy of leadership, public service, and philanthropy. It honors an individual who embodies the spirit and values of Preston Robert Tisch, and who is driving change in her or his community while championing the Aspen Institute ideals of inclusive dialogue, values-based leadership, and action to push change on the most pressing issues of the day. The Aspen Institute is grateful for the support and leadership of the entire Tisch family. Our trustee Laurie, Steve Tisch, and Lizzie and Jonathan Tisch. Their generosity makes possible our Conversations with Great Leaders series, which features change makers who are making the biggest differences and inspiring us to build a more hopeful and more just society. Please join me now in thanking the Tisch family for their vision and generosity. When I was reflecting on the legacy of Preston Robert Tisch, about previous recipients of the award, and about tonight's honoree, I was aware and pretty much in awe of this extraordinary collection of talent and leadership and courage that coalesces around this award. Now think about it. John Lewis, Billie Jean King, Danny Meyer, Darren Walker, Michael Bloomberg, Mitch Landrieu, Sonia Sotomayor, Wynton Marsalis, Misty Copeland, and now, number one, Cecile Richards. All of these honorees are, with the Tisch family, exactly the kind of leaders that the Aspen Institute works to elevate. Cecile, for example, has dedicated her life to service, to the hard work of building coalitions that will drive forward the changes so desperately needed by women and communities all across this country. A self-proclaimed troublemaker, she has been a grassroots organizer for labor rights, the galvanizing president of Planned Parenthood, and a co-founder of Supermajority, a new political action group committed to promoting gender equity. You'll hear more in a few moments. By giving back and inspiring us with their leadership, the Tisch family and Cecile Richards are committed to realizing a free, just, and equitable society. And when it comes to gender equity and women's right to health care and right to choice and to the sacred doctor-patient relationship, no one has stood up more for our children, our daughters, our neighbors, our families than Cecile Richards. It's an incredible gesture of civic engagement and leadership, often, no doubt, at great cost, with strains and stresses, and dissonance probably sometimes when you're out in public. But you make the effort to fight for people's freedom, and we recognize that today. Thank you so much. I'd now like to direct your attention to the screen for a brief presentation on the Aspen Institute and the Preston Robert Tisch Award.
I think kindness and generosity was in my father's DNA. I remember so many acts of kindness from when I was young. Anytime anybody needed something, he would take out his little brown notebook and write a note and always follow up the next day. To one of the initiatives that he's most known for, Take the Field, which rebuilt 45 playing fields in every high school that needed one. I would say everybody who won the award for civic leadership in honor of Preston Robert Tisch, they all embody what the Aspen Institute is so well known for. People who embody and have gone from success to significance.
The arts in general provide us with an understanding of why we are alive.
I try to tell young people, particularly, the more you know about history, the more you know about yourself. And because you have to know how we got there, and then how do you want to shape the future.
But until you actually bear witness to feel what the people who you're trying to help are feeling, you're not going to be empathetic enough to really know what to do.
The best ways out of poverty is a job. So as Laurie talked about getting jobs, you have to go and create jobs.
So you must never, ever give up. You must never, ever give in. Never become bitter. Be hopeful. Be optimistic.
Let's really interrogate why there are so many homeless people. Why do we live in a society that produces this much homelessness? And what are the structural underpinnings that seemingly produce and reproduce bad outcomes?
I see every challenge of a tragedy as an opportunity to get up and figure out what we have to do right.
And as I've said to the country about race, you can't go over it, you can't go around it, you can't go over it, you have to go through it. And going through it's painful because you have to have conversations with people that you know and people that you love. But you got to go through it to get to the other side because there is a better place.
Step back and let people hear your experiences in order for them to learn and change. That's how people connect, like through experiences.
Women are the majority of Americans.
We are the majority of voters. We are the majority of grassroots volunteers and donors.
Our government should look like us.
Nuestro gobierno debería de parecerse a nosotras. The only way we can make that happen is by standing shoulder to shoulder
with women who believe this too.
Maybe you've fought for change for decades.
Demanding equality in your home, in your workplace, from your government.
Maybe you're just getting started.
Let's work together. Supermajority is a new organization for women who want to build our collective power and use it to change this country for good. Because one of us can be dismissed.
Two of us can be ignored. But together,
we aren't just the majority.
We are a supermajority, and we are unstoppable. Let's make sure the entire country knows it.
I'd now like to introduce Laurie Tisch. Laurie is a trustee of the Aspen Institute and the president of the Laurie M. Tisch Illumination Fund, as well as a champion of the arts and education, mental wellness and community, film and justice, and of course, football. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot from Laurie over the last couple years of working together as we've talked about how to make this institute the finest, most impactful version of itself. Laurie, you, Steve, Lizzie, Jonathan occupy places of prominence besides your father and mother, Joan, in the pantheon of American philanthropy, where so many look up to you with admiration and with gratitude. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay.
Well, good evening, and thank you, Dan. You said, and I agree with you, that the Aspen Institute has the best board in the country, but many of us in this room are board members, and we know that one of the most important jobs of a board is to pick a leader. And so I think that we not only have one of the best boards in the country, but one of the smartest. So thank you for your leadership. Well, and Cecile, what an honor and pleasure. I'm going to say a little bit more about you now, but after seeing this wonderful video, first I thought, why didn't we ask her sooner? But you certainly belong in the film and on the stage. It is such an honor for me and for Emily and for my family to include you as an honorary Tisch, and thank you so much we know how busy you are, for accepting this award. So the passion for tackling some of society's biggest problems doesn't always come naturally to everyone, although as I look around, I think it does come naturally for most of the people in this room. But when you've been raised in a family committed to social justice and public service, that passion really is part of your DNA. We'll talk a little bit more about Cecile during the conversation, but I want to reiterate what Dan said, that Cecile has a commitment to bringing about social change, which has been truly the underlying melody of her life, a life of activism that began with organizing workers in hotels, healthcare, and janitorial industries throughout California, Louisiana, and Texas. And she is now focused on providing resources and training for women activists across the spectrum of all backgrounds and life experiences. As we know, Cecile is the daughter of the great Texas Governor Ann Richards. She worked with her mother on her first campaign, the successful election to the state legislature of Sarah Weddington, the lawyer who, as you remember, argued the landmark 1973 U.S. Supreme Court case, Roe v. Wade, which legalized abortion nationwide. Fast forward to 2006, when Cecile became president of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America and the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. In the 12 years that she headed the organization, Cecile expanded its advocacy for access to health care and ensured that PPA played a pivotal role in shaping care and coverage for all women who needed it under the Affordable Care Act. By the time she left the organization last year, its membership had nearly quadrupled from 2.5 million supporters to more than 11. Wow. And now, with her partners, Ai-Jin Poo, director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and Black Lives Matter, and Black Lives Matter co-founder Alicia Garza, Cecile is helping women bring about social change through an organization called Supermajority. In an interview in the Washington Post, Cecile pointed out that while women are the majority in this country, their issues and concerns are too often put aside. As Cecile said, we're seen as a constituency rather than the majority of people in this country. And she added that women have always been doing the work involved in creating a better world, whether it's running the PTA or organizing around reproductive rights. Supermajority aims to bring together the activists and provide them with tools and training to work toward the common goals of protecting women's rights and making sure that their voices are heard. This is a conversation that Cecile started while growing up in Texas and continues in 2019. As we all know, it was 100 years ago with the passage of the 19th Amendment that women were guaranteed the right to vote. And with the help of Supermajority, women's voices will continue to be united, creating the kind of world we all want to live in. And truly, I can't think of a better recipient for the 2019 Preston Robert Tisch Award in Civic Leadership than that woman who is helping us move closer to that world, my dear friend and a person who I greatly admire, Cecile Richards.
Thank you so much. This is so beautiful.
But I'm not finished.
Oh, okay.
But
should I stand here?
You stand here.
Okay,
absolutely.
okay.
I feel more empowered just standing next to you.
I think the two of us could do anything.
Exactly. But I'd also like to acknowledge the group that Cecile has chosen to receive the $25,000 stipend that comes with the award. Black Lives Matter Fund, and BVM Capacity Building Institute, which supports individuals and organizations that are striving to obtain social justice, not just on Election Day, but every day throughout the year. And while we're on the subject of powerful women and their daughters, or so the rumor goes, and their powerful, impactful, and productive daughters, I would also like to invite tonight's moderator, Emily Tisch Sussman, to take a seat on stage. Emily has been at the forefront of the progressive movement in America for more than a decade and is a leading Democratic political strategist. She's the host of the popular political podcast, Your Primary Playlist, where she interviews women shaping policy at the highest levels, including Nancy Pelosi, Stacey Abrams, and of course, tonight's honoree, Cecile Richards. At least as importantly, Emily is the mother of soon-to-be 3 out of my 5 grandchildren. Her daughter, Lila, named after my mother, Joan Lila, has all the sass and independence passed down through the maternal line through Emily. Emily, I hope you have as much fun raising her as I had with you. It wasn't always easy, but it was never, ever dull. So Emily, please come to the stage. And again, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
I just switched this for our mic placement.
Great. You're a pro at that. How exciting.
I'm excited.
I didn't even get to say, thank you, Dan, and I'm so humbled to be in this august company. And I guess I would just say thank you to the Aspen Institute, obviously to Lori and the entire Tisch family, but the only person that I really wish could be here tonight is my mother, Ann Richards, who loved the Aspen Institute. And she and Skip Gates got into all kinds of trouble at the Aspen Institute. And every once in a while I'll see him and he'll remind me of that. But anyway, so thank you for really enriching her life and letting her, be part of a bigger community that meant so much to her. So anyway, thank you on behalf of Mom.
I mean, honestly, I can't think of anyone more deserving than you. This is the company that you should be in, that you are in. When I started my podcast, the concept was to find the women who really understood, who are at the heart of the policy issues, the heart of the organizing, and allowed their thoughts, your thoughts, to illuminate all of us. You were the first call that I made. You were the first person to say yes, and you were the second interview that I've ever done.
You did a great job.
Well, you were such a great subject to interview. You're so excellent. I think it honestly gave me the confidence to do the rest of it.
There we go.
But it also means that you can give me notes at the end of this. If you think that I'm getting worse, I'm open to that.
But I think it's actually good. I'm glad you said that, because I do think this is an interesting moment, and it's part of what sort of the work I do every day now at Supermajority and think about, which is much different than my mother's era, sort of when women were just beginning to sort of break through, is that I think women taking joy in the success of other women is something that is palpable, and it's exciting. And so your success sort of lifts up every other woman. So anyway, good for you.
I do think that's something that I don't know that we have seen at other moments. I mean, certainly not. I feel like when I was starting out in work, I would hear horror stories about women not supporting other women. But actually, I think the success and celebrating one another leads to a perfect moment for Supermajority to say, yes, we are the organizers. Yes, we are. So great job on that one.
Yeah, no, and it's sort of the shine theory, right? Just that every woman sort of shining on each other makes everyone stronger. And I think it can be at the smallest grassroots level to women taking joy in Oprah Winfrey at the Golden Globes and everything in between. So it's kind of it's a very interesting moment.
Well, we're going to cover, hopefully, a good amount of it, and there's a lot that we could cover. So just from a logistical note, if people have questions that we want to add in at the end, there are notes that you can write out some notes and pass them to the end, and we'll be collecting them throughout. So I want to do a little rewind.
Great.
How does one get to be the Cecile Richards? I mean, you are truly an organizing legend. What you did with Planned Parenthood impacted the electoral space, I think, in ways beyond people can even possibly comprehend. So, I mean, did you always know that you were a troublemaker? Did you always know that you were destined for activism greatness?
I'll rewind too, because so for those who don't know me, I was born in Waco, Texas, and actually, a lot of people say, well, why are women from Texas so tough? It's sort of like, you really only have one option. There's not like, if you want things to change. But I like to think that much like it's interesting actually that we're talking, because of course I knew your grandmother, Joan, who was just incredible, and of course your mother, and you, and your sister, and now your daughters, soon-to-be daughters. And I actually come from the same kind of family. We're this like incredible matriarchy of just, tough women, and where I think women had to do it all. And my favorite way to ground that is when my grandmother, Ona, she had, been through the Depression. She and my grandfather, they lived out in the country. She built their house. They canned all their own vegetables. I always thought if an atomic bomb went off, they could eat for 2 years off what she had in the deep freeze. But when she got pregnant with my mother, there was no way she was going to a hospital, because they just didn't do that. They were country folk, and you had the baby at home. Anyway, of course, she worked all the way up until then she was ready to deliver. And she had arranged for the neighbor woman to come over and cook supper for my grandfather, because of course it was unthinkable that he would make dinner for himself.
So my husband's here. Let's not get any ideas.
I'm just saying. That was then. But anyway, as the story goes, Ona's in the birthing bed, in labor, and the neighbor woman comes over to make dinner, but she had organized, chicken was what my grandmother planned. Of course, the neighbor lady didn't know how to kill a chicken, so there in the birthing bed, she hoists herself up on her elbow and wrings the chicken's neck right from the bed. And I like to think that's how Ann Richards came into this world. So it's... So if you ask how I kind of got into being both a troublemaker and I hope someone who just felt like there were just things we had to get busy and get doing, it was definitely my mother had enormous influence. My grandmothers did as well, and now of course my daughters. And it is kind of wonderful to be able to carry on that tradition. Something else too, I was just looking at all the amazing people that have been honored here. And of course, one of my just idols, John Lewis, I love what he said, which is part of what all this is about, is never giving up, just never giving up. And if you talk about someone who never gave up. But I think the thing that Mom would always say, and I certainly feel, is doing work for social justice and being able to devote your life to public service is such a privilege. Yeah. And I think sometimes people think it's a sacrifice, but to me, it's the honor of a lifetime. To think that for this brief time we have on Earth, that we could maybe change things just a little bit for the better, it's incredibly humbling. And so, and actually I was just thinking about, because I think, I worked for Planned Parenthood for many years, and it's interesting because I do think people come up to me sometimes with a stricken look, like, how are you doing? And it must be so hard, and people must be so hard on you. And actually, the thing I like to disabuse people of, particularly for the 12 years I was there, is that for every one person who may have said something unkind, there were 99 women who had stopped me on the street to say, thank you for the work that you do and that Planned Parenthood does, because they were there for me when I needed access to health care and I couldn't get it. And so I think sometimes we have people in the public sometimes have an illusion that somehow this work is it's tough, and I hope it's tough, because if it's not tough, we're not doing enough. But I think it's incredibly rewarding.
I definitely had that feeling after the 2016 election. I felt like everybody was just sort of like spinning and not really sure how to channel it. But I did feel that way and would regularly talk with our staff about that we are the privileged ones, because we show up every day and get to do this work as our work.
Right.
And so we should cherish that, but also remember that we are the privileged ones and find opportunities for others around us to be able to join in our work, which you've obviously done with all of your great organizing. I do want to pause in this moment of legacy. I mean, it's such an interesting conversation to have. Obviously, we are at an award named for my grandfather, started by my mother. And we do think so much about your mother and the legacy that she created. She is truly a living legend, and you are a legend as well. I mean, what was that like for you to be able to carve your own path?
Well, of course, one of the things I think people say, like, what was it like having Ann Richards as a mother? And it's like, who knew, right? Until later on, that wasn't how everyone's mother didn't, greet them when they came home from college in a Dolly Parton outfit. There were just things that you just saw, like, I thought that's how the world worked. Because she was larger than life. And certainly I've never even began to think that, we shared so much in common, but she was iconic. She was really, really different. I think for me, what really had made a difference, and I think she and my dad, who's actually still alive and has been a civil rights attorney his whole life, who I talked to last night, and he has done yeoman service in changing the lives and opportunities for so many people, particularly in Texas. But they really just believed that you had to hold out and just find whatever kind of brought you joy and that you felt passionate about. And I know a lot of kids who didn't have that, who their parents are like, when are you going to graduate? What are you going to do? How are you going to make a living? I never had that pressure from my mother or my father. And I don't know that they thought going off to Brown University and becoming a labor organizer was the path that was necessarily what they had planned, but I never felt anything other than, if that's what you need to do, we support you. And so I did kind of carve my own path. And I hope that, I know you're raising your kids now, and I know I have 3 children, and it is always hard because you don't want to visit off on them your own expectations. But I feel like that really held me in good stead. And so I try to encourage young people, just particularly young people who have all the opportunity, who have a college education, who can make choices, because so few people get to make a choice about what they do with their lives and for a living, is if you can hold out and find something that really, really does make your heart sing, then that's the most incredible gift you could ever get. And I think this is an exciting moment. I look around, just young people everywhere being at this incredibly challenging moment in our history, but also a time of, it's sort of like a movement moment. And I think I really encourage young people to just jump in. Don't wait for instructions. Don't wait to be asked. Just jump in, because not only will you feel good about making a difference, but you'll meet the most amazing people in the world.
One of your daughters did decide to go into the same career field as you, and has been a senior staffer on a presidential campaign. Do you think that for her going into the same field that you were in, that your mother was in, do you think that she had similar challenges or advantages that you had, or were they different just by position or where she was in the world?
So I don't know. I do feel like, and my daughter Lily, who, well, I may as well say it, she was a communications director for Kamala Harris until a week ago, and but had, and also of course worked for Hillary. So I feel like we're repeating too many things now. These, evenings of despair. But the truth is, Lily is so much smarter than I am and has such a great political instinct that I just feel like many days I feel like I was just the genetic link between Ann Richards and Lily Adams. And they were just like my job is done, because they have the same sort of really great ear for politics and listening to people. But she definitely did her own thing. I mean, she worked her way up through the political, and as you know, in politics, you kind of got to prove yourself. And I remember she started her first job on a campaign doing clips, which in those days was you got up at 4 a.m. and had to read everything and literally do the clips. But that's good, because then you actually, the whole, the A to Z of campaigning. But I will say it's hard as a mom. I write about this in my book, the night that Hillary lost the election, and just the sobbing together, curled up in bed with Lily. It's hard as a mom to see her go through this heartbreak again, honestly.
Sadly, she did
go
through it again last week.
That's right.
But do you give her professional advice? Like, was it different this time?
Oh my gosh, no. In fact, if anything, I hope someday I get to work for Lily Adams. That's kind of that's my exit career path. So no, but it's fun. In fact, it's funny. I don't think I'll embarrass her, but there are times. She started working for Kamala when she became the United States Senator and was her communications director, and Lily will call me and say, I told her she needs to do this. And I was like, Lily, she's a United States Senator. That is sort of, I love your generation, if you will. It's just like this confidence that young women feel. And I mean, it was all appropriate. It was like great advice, but just to have that feeling that no time to waste, not waiting your turn. That to me is really exciting to see for your generation.
So I want to switch a little bit to, you've done so much and you continue to do so much, and you obviously have so many passions. Some are related, some are a little bit distinct. Do you think of your work as your personal activism, or do you keep them separate?
It's my whole life. And I was fortunate, when I was a union organizer right out of college in New Orleans. I love seeing Mitch Landrieu up there, who has done so much and really has taken on the issue of race and racism, as have many others, and it's so important. But anyway, I really became a union organizer in New Orleans, and that's how I met my husband, Kirk, who showed up one day, and he was the only person who had like a working car. It's like, God, this guy's like, he's cute, and he actually has a car. And we've been
the bar
together.
is so low on campaigns.
Listen, I'm telling you, exactly. No. No, it was funny. Actually, we were working in the New Orleans projects organizing hotel workers, and Kirk shows up at the office, and he's got on like khaki pants, lace-up shoes, and a button-down shirt. I was like, either you're a Jesuit or you look like you were selling insurance, but whatever. He took to it, and we broke him in, and then we got married, and then we had 3 kids, and like life went on. So I feel like for us, yes, this is our passion, this is our life, but that's okay. And in fact, I feel like that even those early days as a union organizer, working with women who were making the minimum wage, working, cleaning 15 rooms a day, many of them single moms, and yet they were willing to risk everything to try to organize a union, just to get, and even for them, I know many of them, and I think of them like Audrey Carr, these women I met, they really didn't think things were going to ever get better for them, but they wanted it to get better for the next generation of women that came after them. And I feel like, so sometimes when people say, oh, our jobs are hard and all this, I think nothing compares, cleaning hotels in New Orleans, or, working in a nursing home in East Texas, being a janitor in downtown Los Angeles. It's like the most humbling experience of my life. And so I feel like for me, to get to do work that maybe makes things a little bit better for folks who are willing to do anything, willing to risk all of that to make life better for folks, is really, those are memories I never forget.
But also in management positions, you've obviously been a CEO, you've been the president of the organization. There's specific challenges that can come up in management when everybody is living their passion. There's things that are wonderful about it, but it also means that everyone you work with has an opinion, a personal opinion about their work, and everyone outside has a personal opinion about, I'm sure you were for no lack of opinions about Planned Parenthood when you were there. How do you manage? Like, are there specific, management techniques that you use?
Oh my God, no, and definitely, if I gave any advice, you'd have to completely disregard it. But it's funny though you say that. So I was actually thinking about something that happened actually the night after the election, or the morning after the election. I don't know if you remember, well, I'm sure you remember.
It's kind of a blur, to be honest.
Well, it's funny because I would run into people who said like, oh my God, I couldn't get out of bed for a week. I couldn't, I really had a hard time. But the interesting thing was, the next morning, even though we'd been up all night, I came to work because I knew there were thousands of people, patients around the country showing up at Planned Parenthood health centers, desperately hoping that in fact we were still there and our doors would be open. And obviously a lot of the staff, had felt really, it was a very emotional day, as you know. But the interesting thing, and it's kind of addressing what you're saying, I don't know if it really is that so many staff said to me, as hard as last night was, I was so grateful to have this office to come to this morning, because this is a place where I feel like we do good. We take care of people every day, regardless of what happens with politics. And to me, I think that's, yes, of course, people have a lot of feelings, but nothing. Once you've worked for an organization or part of a campaign or a movement where people are driven by common purpose, you almost can never go back to, I think, the real world. And I just, my 12 years at Planned Parenthood are something nothing will ever touch that. And I'm so grateful for the people who did get up every day, regardless of picketers or protesters or politics, and serve the women of America.
One of the things that's been really made me, I started to think a lot about in doing this podcast and interviewing a lot of women.
Am I doing something wrong? Dear.
I'd just like to reclip it into your jacket instead.
Okay.
We're doing it in real time.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, I mean, I've been interviewing a lot of women who are living their passions and are experts in their field, and I think by a lot of measures would be considered quite powerful, but sometimes don't consider themselves powerful and are actually a little bit shy about promoting themselves. So it's just made me think a lot about the perception of women in power and where we are in this moment. One of the things that concerns me a little bit about media coverage of women in power is that things can be very quickly be called like a Me Too thing. Or like if we see women rising to power, then it gets categorized as that. How do you think that we move forward so that we can have positive perceptions of women in power that are, I mean, women can be powerful without having to like escape sexual harassment. So like, how do we have that conversation? How do we build ourselves to that point?
I mean, I think it is a complicated question, because I do think women, a lot of women, we aren't looking for power for the sake of power, and we're not looking for power to be powerful over other people. We're actually trying to model a new kind of power, and distributive power, and lifting other folks up power. And I just think we don't have that much experience, but I feel like it's catching on. And I mean, actually, we were just talking earlier, I think one of the most interesting things, and since you're in politics and a lot of folks here follow politics, I think one of the most fascinating things has been to see Speaker Nancy Pelosi over these last 3 years in her own way, not shy away from being powerful, but doing it from such a principled, in my opinion, point of view and position. And I think she, and then of course all the young women, the diverse women that got elected to Congress and were elected in 2018, completely changing how women can, what it looks like to be a powerful woman in politics, from Lauren Underwood to, just all across the board. And I just think in some ways we haven't had the models, we haven't had the examples. And I think the other thing that's hard, I mean, I think of, when Hillary ran for president, of course, there was this, I remember even when Mom used to try to school Hillary on, like, get a hairstyle and stick with it, all these things. And as Hillary said, I wish I'd taken her advice. She really did. But I feel like when my mom was in politics, it was like there were certain things you had to do, right? There were all the rules, and the way you dressed, the way you looked, the way you spoke. And how exciting to think that actually women of all different kinds of backgrounds and points of view can actually have political power. And that's a revolution. I mean, look at all the women running for president, or that were in the field in the beginning. It's exciting to think that we can see a diverse group of people and a diverse group of women as being powerful, and that it's not all going to be the same.
What has stuck out to you in the commentary of women in power, whether it's the 2018 class of women in Congress or the large presidential field of women who are running?
I just think it's still really hard because we don't have these models. I think it's very hard, it sort of is, whether it's, shrill, disagreeable, too loud, too strong, not strong enough, doesn't have a position, has too many positions. And I won't go through all my own favorite examples, but I just think it's hard. People don't still, and particularly political commentators, as you well know, since this is your work, 2/3 of them are men still, and I just think we do not have, we just don't have the cultural change yet to adapt to women as just treating them like we treat men. And so, and obviously I feel like we've seen that in the presidential stage, but look, if Hillary hadn't run for president, we wouldn't have had 6 women running this time. And each time it's going to get better. And often, I feel about her is like she did that to open the world for other women to be able to run, and that's just, we're going to have to just keep doing it.
I mean, honestly, I do still think about this. It's very relevant, even in this moment, that in 2016, I very much hid my pregnancy on air because the perception that I kind of got from producers was that people didn't want to hear hard political commentary from someone who is visibly pregnant. And I do think that's changed a little bit now, but not a ton.
No, it hasn't. Actually, this is...
that ship's kind of sailed. I might be visibly pregnant.
Yeah. No, and thank you for being visibly pregnant. I mean, this is what it's. I mean, I'll just give you a small example of how, and it is actually kind of the work we're doing now at Supermajority, because I think women have now in the United States, we're now almost half the workforce. We are more than half the voters, obviously. More than half the college students. I mean, I could go down the list. So everything has changed in the sense that we really are either a majority or close to a majority, but still we are kind of batting up against institutions, whether it's the workplace, whether it's government, that were not built to have us in it. And I think a perfect example is the way we treat pregnancy and maternity care and maternity leave. So when we passed the Affordable Care Act, which was one of the sort of the epic battles while I was at Planned Parenthood, before that, I think only 19% of insurance plans covered maternity benefits. And it was a huge fight, because I actually remember the hearing, one of the Senate committees in which a senator from Arizona said, well, I don't think we should cover maternity benefits because I am never going to need them, because apparently he was past his childbearing age at that point. But why it makes a difference that women are in office, Debbie Stabenow turned right back around and said, well, I bet your mother needed them. And of course, and we did get, I mean, it was a fight, but now 100% of plans have maternity coverage. That's just been for a few years. Still in this country, I feel like pregnancy is treated by many employers as a nuisance rather than actually kind of the way we all got here. So these are the issues that I feel like now that women are just women are realizing, particularly women of your generation. I think a lot of us, we just like, well, that was how it was. But now that women are a majority, they're thinking like, wait, the system doesn't work. And we do need systems change. I think like Darren was saying, there's so many things where you go, it can't be on each individual to try to solve this problem. We need to actually change the system.
So can you help us understand how Supermajority is helping us do that? I mean, women have long been organizers in their communities, but it seems like have struggled to, not in every instance, but have struggled to kind of get it to a bigger scale, to scale up what they've been doing. And what I was really struck by when you started Supermajority was the acknowledgement that women are organizing in the communities. And it seemed like you're trying to help connect them. But can you help us understand that sort of theory of infrastructure?
Sure. I mean, I think the idea is, yes, you're right. Women have always been kind of the ground troops in politics. But as actually a congresswoman said to me the other day, who's been in Congress for a while, she said, you know, what's interesting, it was the first meeting of all the Democratic women. They now have enough that they have their own caucus, right? But of course, we were in a basement eating like bad takeout. But still, it was the first. And she said, you know, it's interesting because all the things we're talking about, affordable child care, access to paid family leave, equal pay. These are issues that all of our male colleagues agree with us on in the caucus, but somehow when it comes to appropriating time, we're putting money into roads and bridges and we're not putting money into the issues that actually are fundamental to women in this country and families in this country. And so I think the idea of supermajority is if we are a majority of this country, as we are, and if we are actually involved in the political process, we have to be more than simply the ground troops to get people elected. And that it's important, and I think particularly in this next election where women will determine the next president, just by the numbers, is to say, and these are the things we would like to see done. And because I think that there are, and it's interesting, these are issues I believe that cross party line, they cross income, they cross geography, experience, and often generation. It's sort of fundamental fairness. And to me, that's an exciting thing. And what I think we're finding at Supermajority, something like 70% of the folks who've signed up with us have never been involved in advocacy or politics. And I think it's women who are just simply saying, I think this country could be doing a better job. It could be more fair. And they're frankly raising their hands and saying, tell me what we can do. And one of the women who I been getting to travel, and actually we spoke at the Aspen Institute this summer at the Ideas Fest, is Alicia Garza. And it's been really fun to get to know her better and actually to travel with her and talk about how these issues, they cross race, they cross all kinds of things, I think, barriers that women have had that we haven't actually worked together before. And I'm hoping this is an opportunity to make that different.
Every campaign office will tell you that if they know that their office is populated with volunteers who are retired teachers and retired social workers, you're good.
Right.
Like that, you have your engines of any campaign there. Mm-hmm. So what kind of impact are you guys looking to have in 2020 specifically?
Well, in 2020 specifically, we have one small, modest goal, which is to run the largest woman-to-woman voter turnout program in the country. And so I think we can do that. And as Lori said, I think this is an interesting moment because, of course, next August will be the centennial of the 19th Amendment, the beginning of women's suffrage, although I think it's also incredibly important to know our history because it wasn't the beginning of suffrage for all women. It was only for white women. And that's an important thing for us to remember and commit to never repeating the mistakes of the past. But how exciting would it be 100 years from the beginning of suffrage if women, in fact, were the major voting bloc in the country, if we had a record number of women voting and women really began to sort of shift the tide on not just what's happening in 2020, but frankly what's happening for this next century. And I think one of the interesting things about obviously African American women have been the most reliable voters in this country, the most progressive voters in this country forever. And boy, if other women could sort of take their lead and we could actually begin to work across race about issues that affect us all, I do think we could change things for this next century.
One of the things that you and I discussed in the podcast that we're still sort of struggling with is that there are a lot of issues that women care about. In fact, all of the issues that women care about. But it is hard to talk about women voting without talking about reproductive rights. Mm-hmm. It ends up being kind of used as a proxy. Right. And given your long expertise, I'd love to get your opinion on the moment here. Where do you think the next battle is on reproductive health? Is it in the courts? Is it in the states? Do you have to take the presidency or it's all over? Like, where do you think the fight is going?
Well, I think the presidency is going to be important on just any number of issues. And of course, the courts, and that's a whole nother conversation, but just the really, I think, radical reshaping of the federal judiciary in these last 3 years are going to have impacts for a long, long time. So there's always going to be battles in the court, but I believe where things happen, where they begin, and where you can begin to build power is at the local and the state level. Clearly on reproductive rights, that's true. And we just saw the Kentucky, the Supreme Court refused to take the Kentucky case yesterday or the day before. But that, in fact, that's been true for a long, long time. And unfortunately, I know the question usually is, well, what happens if Roe is overturned? Honestly, in some states, Roe is almost meaningless because the barriers that women face economically, geographically, to access reproductive health care, including safe and legal abortion, are overwhelming. And you could look at the stats. Here's the irony to me about all this is with the passage of the Affordable Care Act, raising the number of insured people, allowing now everyone who gets insurance to get birth control at no cost. This was revolutionary. 62 million women, overnight got access to birth control. We are now at the lowest rate of teenage pregnancy in the history of the United States of America and the lowest rate of abortion since Roe versus Wade was decided. And so we are making enormous strides on reducing unintended pregnancy, and it's all about access. And so, that's to me the heartbreaking thing about these punitive laws is, of course, they affect patients, pregnant people who have the least access to care the most because, of course, wealthy women will always be able to access the care that they need. And that, to me, is the real that's what's so heartbreaking about what's happening, I think, under this administration.
And also in terms of strategy, I mean, I'm sure you saw the article in the New York Times last week that it wasn't just that the right had really built up the anti-choice movement, but that the left had been overly reliant on Roe v. Wade, and so hadn't really kind of been building the infrastructure behind it. And I actually think that could be said for a lot of movements, that for a lot of different constituencies. I actually had discussed this with our democracy expert on our podcast, that the left has been overly reliant on same-sex marriage, on civil rights, on education equity, overly reliant on federal cases, and therefore hadn't kind of built the infrastructure behind it. So, I mean, what do you think of that? Is that the right assessment?
It's funny. I actually disagreed with Lisa, and I went, Lisa and Elizabeth. I think I think it was like a vast oversimplification of the situation, but I do agree in principle that no victory is ever permanent. I mean, look at voting rights. Right. You can't rely on what's happened in the past. You have to win these fights and then build on them. And so, I mean, that is a lot of the work we did at Planned Parenthood. Actually, when I came in 12 or 13 years ago was because we had become a very effective healthcare provider. 1 in 4 women in this country go to Planned Parenthood for healthcare. We're in every state, hundreds of health centers. But increasingly, it was difficult for women to access that care because of legislation that prevented it. And so I feel like we spent the last 12 years, and maybe it's true that, obviously it would have been great if that had started decades before, but we did spend the last 12 years really revitalizing our grassroots movement, our ability to participate in advocacy, in elections and politics. I don't think anyone could have, and we made huge progress. I mean, some of the examples I gave under the Affordable Care Act, I think we actually have moved the needle dramatically. I think that, though, definitely under this administration, a lot of progress that was made even just under the Obama administration has been rolled back. Environmental, on everything, as you say.
I mean, I probably miscategorize it as saying it's like a right versus left, because really we used to have Republicans for choice.
Absolutely.
I think we actually still have them in the country,
Correct.
But it does feel like they've disappeared, definitely from the federal electeds.
Yeah.
It feels like it's totally become a litmus test for
Yes.
Republicans. So how do we bring Republicans back? I mean, they're in the country. Like, how do we get elected officials, how do we give them a pathway again to be pro-choice?
I think we just talk about these. Ironically, if you go back to the way back, you think of the conservative, really sort of traditional conservative Republicans, like Barry Goldwater, or you can go back. They believe strongly in individual liberties, small government, and it's so ironic that in what we're seeing is they want small government. This federal government wants small government in everything except when it comes to our reproductive rights. And I actually think it is a very mainstream value to I think acknowledge two things, and we probably have talked about this. One is that we can all agree, this is a very personal decision, and obviously everyone has to have the same opinion. I think the question is, what do you want government to do about it? And one of the most interesting campaigns that I ever was involved in was in Mississippi, where they actually did, the state legislature passed a bill to outlaw access to safe and legal abortion. And if you had polled that, obviously very, very conservative state, but the voters in Mississippi overwhelmingly defeated that on the ballot because they could actually understand that you could have your own personal opinions, but not want the government to basically make those decisions for every person. And so I think there is a strong individual streak in this country, agreement that government doesn't have the business of getting into people's personal lives. And this is an overwhelmingly pro-choice country. And it is tough to see the Republican Party have gone so far to the right. I don't think it represents, from our polling, it doesn't represent the entirety of the party, but also party labels, as you know, are becoming less and less important. And independent voters and particularly independent women are overwhelmingly they're not only pro-choice, they're really concerned about what's happening in the country today, what the government's trying to do to take away what they think are fundamental personal decisions.
That was one of the things that we had heard, that we had spoken with basically like an expert on women who had voted for Trump and asked about this issue of choice, saying, well, where do they stand? Like they do still have reproductive organs. Like, do they care? And what she had said from her research was that they never thought that Roe v. Wade would be overturned. They always thought the right would exist. And so they felt comfortable supporting elected officials that would limit it because they always thought the right would be there. But that now they're starting to feel more nervous. Yep. And so they're more open to voting for officials who are more pro-choice. But I mean, how do we bring these women into the fold? How do we bring conservative women into the fold in like a women's organizing movement? One of the early criticisms later criticisms of the Women's March was that conservative women weren't included. Mm-hmm. How do we do that?
I think the most important thing we can do is actually provide women information about what's going on. And that's what I hear all across the country, from Wisconsin to Florida. Women are saying, I can't possibly, it's impossible to follow what's happening in the news. Even if they are concerned, and they are, Tressa Undum has done some very interesting focus groups where women say, kind of to your point, I just never thought that I wouldn't be free to make my own decisions in this country, and I, for the first time in my life, feel like the government is taking away my rights, even if it's sort of they don't exactly understand what's happening, but they've heard enough. I do, and that's one of the reasons we just did a soft launch of Supermajority News as a source of information for women about here's what's actually happening. Because, as you know, depending on where you live, the news you get and the places you can go to for, I hope, unbiased information can really differ. And that is a real concern for women around the country. And also women will say to me in Iowa, all my girlfriends are coming to me and asking me what's going on. And I feel like I, as a woman in Iowa, need to know. And so I hope that Supermajority can at least begin to play some role. And particularly as we move into an election where misinformation is going to be, at a premium, women are looking for people they can trust.
That's so interesting. And we talk a lot about the breaking down of where you get news matters at this point almost more than what news you get. Right. Because as soon as information comes in, people either decide that is a source that I trust or that isn't a source that I trust. And so they filter it that way. So it's really interesting that people are looking for sources of information as well, but makes total sense. Yeah. I also like to hear that people in Iowa are feeling a lot of pressure to have information.
Yeah.
That makes me feel great.
Well, interestingly, of course, we always know that women were less likely to run for office and do other things because I felt like they didn't know enough. And so women actually like to be informed. And we know that's always been a problem with voting, is that sometimes women are uneasy about voting because they're not sure they have enough information. Something that men don't seem to really have had as much challenge with. And no, it's just a fact, whether it's right or wrong. But I think it's actually interesting and exciting that women are saying, there's a lot of things going on I don't think are right, but I don't know exactly what's happening, and I don't know what I can do about them. And so I think, again, trying to just begin to provide a platform for women to say, okay, this is news about what women are doing, these are about issues I care about, and things that I can reliably, tell other women so that they don't feel so ill-informed as well.
So I feel like this is a great point to know if we do have questions, we can bring them in here. But I also just want to make sure that since we have this moment with you, everybody wants to know what can I do?
Exactly.
What feels realistic for me? So, Cecile Richards, what can I do? What can an individual person do?
Well, it's funny. I obviously sign up for Supermajority if you want to, and we can put you to work. I feel like this is the theme of my life right now, and that's actually kind of why I wrote my book, because I felt like every time I walked on the street, someone was stopping me and saying, "What am I supposed to do?" And I thought, okay, well, instead of telling everybody on the subway, I'm just going to put it in a book, and then everybody can read it, and they can go do their thing. But sometimes it's just saying, I don't know, just do more. Do something more. My favorite experience, even on book tour, was I was actually at NYU doing a book event, and I think with Alyssa, and cards came in from the audience, and one of the questions was this question. It's like, I don't know what to do. I'm in despair. And I said, well, I don't know who asked the question, but if I were you, I would quit my job and move to Atlanta and work for Stacey Abrams, because she's the most exciting person running for office, whatever, And this is before the summer before the governor's race. And 5 days later, no kidding, I get a message through Instagram. Someone has found me and said, I was sitting in the audience, I heard what you said, I went back home, quit my job. Oh my God. I'm starting as Stacy's deputy digital director next week in Atlanta. And so I think sometimes I love that example because I think sometimes we overthink it. We think there's like one thing we can do, and if we do that, everything's going to change. And so I'm just much more like, start before you're ready. Don't wait for instructions. Don't wait for someone to ask you. Just do more, and you will feel better. Turn off the television, unless you're watching Emily, and just go out and get involved. A lot of moms, are saying, I don't know what to do. My kids, I'm raising my kids. I'm trying to raise them with good values. I said, and this is probably a Lori Tisch. This would probably be a Lori Tisch example. Is I said, look, your kids, they don't learn from what you say to them or tell them. They learn by what they see you do. So whether you're going to a town hall meeting or you're marching or you're running for office or you're volunteering on a campaign, take your kids along, because that's how they're going to learn that they actually too can change the world. And what a great opportunity we have right now to sort of be living our small d democratic values at this moment.
So we get some great questions from the audience. I love this. So what do you feel was the most meaningful change you've helped bolster in your career thus far?
Besides raising my 3 children, which of course for any mom is, that's when you go to bed at night feeling, okay, well at least I did that. I do think
actually the bar of keep them alive. That's all we're at right now.
Yeah. And I actually think that it was, and I did, again, I write about this. It was the fight to get birth control covered in the Affordable Care Act, which you would think was like, that's like a no-brainer. Everyone uses it. People like it. It's guys like it. But as you probably remember, we had hearings in Congress about whether or not birth control should be covered in insurance plans, and the only thing that the congressional panel shared in common was none of them actually needed the benefit because they were all men. And so it's sort of like there was such a battle, and we had like young people in gigantic pill packs running around college campuses and organizing, and people calling the White House. But I remember the day, probably the best day of my sort of organizing life was the day that President Obama called me. I love to say that. I just love that.
You can say it again if you want to.
Well, it was really fascinating because it was one of these things I just never thought we would get done, but it was obviously built on decades of people organizing. It wasn't, this was just like this one opening and such an incredible thing. And actually, this is what the president said. I don't think I've ever said this in public. It was kind of funny. He said, Cecile, how are you doing? You know how he was. How are you doing? He said, well, Cecile, I got to make 3 calls today. He says, I got to call the Catholic bishops, I got to call the Catholic Hospital Association, and I got to call you. And this is going to be the best call I have. And I said, well, thank you, Mr. President. And he said, I'm about to announce at the White House that from now on, all people, all women will have birth control covered in their insurance plans, no matter where they work, at no cost. End of, period. And I said, thank you, Mr. President. This is going to really change so much for so many people, and it did. And that's one of those things where, again, I think it's kind of to Congressman Lewis's thing. There were so many points at which we should have lost that fight, but people never gave up, and that's part of. And if you're a progressive, look, someone, I think I.F. Stone or someone said it's like, you lose, and then you win. And when you win, it's so big. And so I think that's where it's kind of, One other little kind of parenthetical thing that's like interesting about that is like, whenever you're lobbying at Congress about birth control, they'd say, that's just a social issue, that, lifestyle. I think actually Rush Limbaugh says that a lot, but, or used to say that. And the first year alone, women saved like $1.3 billion in birth control pill costs alone. So I always like to say, it's a social issue unless you've actually had to pay for it. And then it's a economic issue too.
So I think this is I think I'll do 2 more questions here. I think we have time for. So it's sort of a specific question. There are fewer women getting married and fewer having kids. So our birth rate in the US is declining to under 2 per woman. What are the implications of this, and is this an issue for supermajority?
Yeah, Well, I mean, I think that, obviously it's a little bit of it's a complicated question. I think that the fact that women have, and people have other options with what they want to do with their lives. Some women, some people want to be parents, some don't. I mean, when I was growing up, or certainly when my mother was growing up, there were no other options. And so I think on the one hand, that's really important. I think the other side of this, and this is a big issue for supermajority, I mean, I think it's an issue for everyone, and that is women don't have the chance. I was talking about women. I know not only women get pregnant, but the majority of pregnancies are with women, and women don't have equal opportunity about whether or not to have a child, and not putting choice aside, because, and there was an incredible article in USA Today last week or the week before, very poignant article about a woman, a couple saying this was the financially most devastating thing that ever happened to us was having a kid. Because we have no paid family leave, we have almost no paid maternity care, we have such an unequal healthcare system, unequal public education system, all the issues that would help a woman or a family be able to bring children into this world and be able to sustain that financially and also give them the kind of life that they want. These are issues we do not deal with as a country, and we have to deal with as a country. And I do think women are kind of the leading edge of talking about this, but it is about a lot more than the right, a right to decide whether or not you have a child. It is about what's the life going to be like for that child or your family, and so whether it's families in Flint fighting for drinkable water, or whether it's families and young people on the front lines of saying we have to have gun safety reform because too many mothers are afraid to send their kids to school. That's an outrage. And so to me, all of these issues are related to what is a really, really important question, and that is, are we as a country, like, it's interesting, maybe this is the last thing I'll say on this, is that I was just speaking to a foundation this week, and I said the interesting thing about, I'll just take childcare as an example. We have no childcare policy in this country. It's not affordable. I don't care who you are. It's driving parents into debt. It's probably, it is determining decisions about whether they have kids or not. Everyone supports it. We have a million policies. I was at the Urban Institute. I mean, you could fill the Capitol with the policies. What we don't have is the political will to do anything about it. And that's what supermajority is focused on. Because I want to know not just what Elizabeth Warren is going to do about child care, not just what Amy Klobuchar is going to do about child care. I want to know what Joe Biden and Mike Bloomberg and anyone who wants to be president, that's what I want to know what they're going to do about. Yeah. And that's how women begin to get engaged in politics, is because they say, these are the things I care about, and how exciting would it be to see a government and a president lead on those issues.
And I loved that in the last debate, which was the one moderated by all women, the question on childcare went to Andrew Yang.
Right.
Which I loved.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because look, and I hope we live to see the day when these are no longer women's issues, because they're not women's issues. They're everyone's issues. But I'm grateful that women have been kind of leading the charge.
So this is a perfect last question for you. What would you like to happen? What impacts would you like supermajority to have in the next 5 years?
Well, I'm just focused on the next year, but I do think what happens in the next year does set the next 5 years, and as I said, I think it sets the next century. What I would like to have is not only a record turnout of women voters in our history, and I think we can do that, but more women who feel empowered to engage women, educate women, get them to the polls, that feel like they were part of this process. And that is a bit of the organizing conceit here, is that women are doing the work, but they don't feel it and they don't know it. And so how exciting would it be if women in Dayton, Ohio were connected with the women in Sarasota, Florida, and the women in Waco, Texas, and said, actually together, we made this happen, and now it's time for real change. That would be exciting.
Great.
Anyway.
Thank you so much.
It's so good to see you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we stay here. I'm not sure.
What a thrilling evening to be with two visionaries, two leaders, for such an exciting conversation that's about nothing less than the future of our country. Thank you so much, Laurie, to you and your family. Emily, thank you for being here today. Cecile, thank you for joining us, for accepting our honor, and for everything you do to make our country a better place. Thank you so much. Thank you.